4 stages in the history of broadcasting. Let's not miss that. 4 stages in the history of broadcasting. So let us actually look at the history of broadcasting. Let's look at the history of broadcasting from 4 stages. And I keep saying that there are 4 stages that scholars use to look at the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. We're talking about the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. You know, indigenous broadcasting began in 1959 with the establishment of the West African Television by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who was the premier of the Western region. So when you're looking at the history of broadcasting in Nigeria, don't forget to mention that indigenous broadcasting began in 1959. That is with the first indigenous television station. The broadcasting in Nigeria actually began before then, and I said 1932 when the British Empire Service relay station was established in Lagos. That's in 1932. Of course, in 1933, you have the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria being established. It was established as a radio diffusion service. It was established as radio diffusion service. You know, that's in 1933, and then you find these dates, you know, being changed, and you know, some scholars will have this date, some others will have that. But the fact is that the history of broadcasting actually began before the first indigenous television station, which came up in 1935. In 1959. The history of broadcasting in Nigeria began in 1932 when the colonial government, the British colonial government, established the Empire Radio Relay Service in Lagos. And that's the job of that relay service station, was just to, you know, relay the foreign service programs of the BBC, just to rebroadcast. So, but when it now had to do with history of Nigeria, broadcasting in Nigeria, we now had 4 stages that you can take to look at it. So I want to quickly do a rundown of the 4 stages in the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. Let's do a quick rundown of the 4 stages in the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. Indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria began in 1959 with the establishment of Western Nigeria Broadcasting, WNBS, which housed Western Nigeria Television. Let's look at the 4 stages. We said history of broadcasting in Nigeria. There are 4 major stages in the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. 4 major stages in the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. The first stage was 1959 to 1970, and I said what you should take away from these 4 stages is this: take away the major flashpoints, take away the major events that took place within these 4 stages. If you attempt to remember all of them, it's going to be difficult for you in the exam hall, or you know, to teach others, or you just want knowledge. It's going to be difficult, but just get the gist first. Remember the rule in answering questions. The rule in answering questions in history of the press is: don't kill yourself about the dates. Don't break your head about dates. Break your head about the gist. Now the gist will help the dates to come in. Don't start breaking your head with dates, because it means you will have to cram. But what you should break your head about, what you should worry about, is the gist. What are the major events? What were the major stories? Then you find out that as you keep remembering the major events, the dates will start coming in. And a few dates will do. Don't try to cram all the dates. A few dates will do. Just give all the dates. So the first stage was between 1959 to 1970. Remember, we said that the history of broadcasting in Nigeria actually began before the establishment of the first indigenous broadcast service in Nigeria. And that's the history of broadcasting in Nigeria actually began in 1932 with the establishment of the Empire Radio Service by the British colonial government. They established it in Lagos, and it was just to rebroadcast the foreign service programs of the BBC. So it was just a kind of rebroadcast. So if you're actually looking at the history of broadcasting in Nigeria and you don't want to start from 1959, you can actually start from 1932 and then 32, 33, 35, all those dates, they are just talking about the fact that the British colonial government established radio diffusion service, just to relay information from the BBC. But just note that the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria was established as a radio diffusion service, and their job, like I said, was just to relay information from the BBC, especially foreign service programs of the BBC. Just a relay, and that FRCN was housed under the Post and Telegram Office in Lagos. So, but in 1935, it was now changed to radio diffusion system, from distribution system to diffusion system. The fact is that before 1959, the colonial government was controlling radio. Then in 1959, that's when the indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria started. So between 1959 and 1970, broadcasting, the Western Nigeria government established Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, and then we had after Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, under which you now had Western Nigeria Television. It was the first in Africa. One thing you should take away from the first stage is that there was regional control of broadcasting. Now, before 1959, you can actually take your stages back. Instead of saying stage one, because we're looking at indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria, so instead of saying stage one started from 1959, if you want to look at the history of broadcasting in Nigeria, then you can look at your stage one starting from 1932. So between 1932 to 1959, you had colonial government control of broadcasting. I could ask that this morning. Colonial government control of broadcasting. So what was the major picture? What is the major characteristic of the first stage in the history of broadcasting in Nigeria? That's between 1932 to 1959. Colonial control of broadcasting. The colonial government established a broadcast station in Nigeria. That was also when FRCN was established within that 1932 to 1959, and then there was it was basically a relay of messages from the BBC Foreign Service. That's what characterized the first stage of the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. So that's the first stage. Then when you talk about indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria, we now have 1959 to 1970. There was now regional control of broadcasting. Remember how that began? It began in 1956 when Awolowo was denied the right of reply in the radio station that was owned by the colonial government, the radio station that they established in Lagos. Then, of course, eventually they established another one in Ibadan, and then moved up to other places like Kaduna, Enugu, and all that. But the fact is that the colonial government was controlling radio service between 1932 to 1959. So in 1956, Awolowo was denied right of service. Awolowo was denied right of reply after an official of the colonial government criticized the action group led government. After an official of the colonial government criticized the action group led government of Western Nigeria then, and Awolowo was the premier then. So he wanted to respond to those allegations and the criticisms of the official of the colonial government, and they didn't give him that right. So he went to the constitutional conference that was being that was held to prepare Nigeria for independence, and requested that broadcasting should be in the concurrent legislative list. That is to say, at federal level they could legislate to have their own broadcast stations, and at regional level. So regional governments began to control. They agreed, and then the regions started setting up their own stations. So another thing you should take away from this was that between 1959 and 1970, broadcasting was within was after independence. They came up immediately after independence, so they were promoting unity, and they were promoting indigenous programming and all those things. So, of course, during the Civil War, there was propaganda broadcasting between the Radio Biafra and then the Nigerian government that had their own radio and TV stations. They were, running propaganda also trying to promote their own cause then. But the fact is that between 1959 to 1970, there was regional control of broadcasting in Nigeria. The regions had their own broadcast stations, and then Western Nigeria Television was the first TV station in Africa. Of course, in 1959, that's when you have WNTV, and then 1960, the Eastern Nigeria Television came up, and then 1962, Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria was established. Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria was established, and which set up that corporation set up Radio Kaduna TV. That's what they call the television station, Radio Kaduna TV. Now we move to the next stage. The next stage was between 1970 to 1979. Of course, the major event within this, we move to the next stage. That's the second stage. The second stage was between 1970 to 1979. That is in the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. Now remember that we said if it is the history of broadcasting in Nigeria, then you start from 1932 to 1959. But if it is the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria, then you start from 1959 and then start moving. So the second stage was 1970 to 1979. The major event here took place in 1976 when the military government headed by General Olusegun Obasanjo took over the regional television stations. That was in 1976. So broadcasting now left the regional governments. Remember, between 1959 to 1970, it was regional control of broadcasting. But from 1970 to 1979, you now had regional control of broadcasting that left the same, and then you now had federal government control of broadcasting. So the military government took over the regional television stations and started controlling them. And another major event that you take away from 1970 to 1979 is the establishment of NTV, Nigerian Television Station. The time that the military government took over the regional stations, they wanted to manage the broadcast stations in Nigeria from the federal level. So they now set up Nigerian Television, which they now later changed to Nigerian Television Authority, and started managing all those television stations that were owned by the regions, and the federal government started operating, running the broadcast system in Nigeria. And this NTA was established in 1977. That was after the takeover in 1976. After taking over the regional stations in 1976, they now established NTA in 1977. And then there was government monopoly of broadcasting. Definitely, because government was running the affairs of broadcasting in Nigeria, so they monopolized the industry. And because most things that they were earning were from government angle, and people did not develop that interest then like that. But then the fact is that government monopolized broadcasting. Of course, they were controlling broadcasting then. So then we have the next stage, which is stage 3, 1979 to 1992. Remember that what these stages reflect, they reflect the major stages in the evolution of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. They reflect the major turning points. That is the disruptive periods. A disruptive period is a time that major changes that turned around a situation took place. So within this period, 1979 to 1992, other things also came up. And remember that government was controlling broadcasting in the second stage. They took it from the regions. The federal government was controlling it. Now, from 1979 to 1992, states have been created. Nigeria was no longer operating the regional system of government. They now had states, have federal government and states. So broadcasting went back to the concurrent list, and states started having their own stations too. Many states started having their stations then. Concurrent legislative list, like I said, concurrent list is saying that the list is saying the federal government can legislate on that matter, and then the states can legislate on the matter. That was what happened in stage 1 of the history of the indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. Stage 1, 1959 to 1970. The regions were controlling broadcast stations, while the federal government had their own. But basically, television was in the hands of the regional government in the first stage. Second stage, it went back to the federal government took it over, military government. Third stage, it went back to the states, not the regions now. The states had their own now, while the federal government still had the NTA. Now still started broadcasting too. So that's the major event you should take away from the third stage. Another major event you should take away is that there was a surge in indigenous programs. So many, it started of course from the second stage, but in the third stage you had several programs coming up. People were being encouraged to have indigenous programs. You have programs like the New Masquerade. We started, of course, from the second stage, but by then the New Masquerade, the Village Headmaster, such indigenous programs promoting the culture of Nigeria, a lot of them came up, and then there was competition. Take away again from between in the third stage, you now take away the fact that there was competition between the state-owned stations and the federal government stations. So that was both at radio and television level. So that was a very interesting thing that happened in the third stage. Broadcasting became very interesting, became competitive to an extent because the states were now competing for audience with the federal government-owned stations. So people, were now enjoying the television stations and the radio stations because they had options. Another thing you should take away from the third stage, that's between 1979 and 1992, is the fact that there was partial commercialization of NTA as NTA moved away from public service broadcasting. That is public broadcasting. That is to say, before a number of programs were being aired for free. That and NTA didn't have that complete latitude to be taking some fee for programs, but they now made them commercial. NTA was now made commercial. That is to say, they tried to rake in revenue. So within the 79 to 92, NTA now became more commercialized. Partially, people now they could pay for news, pay for events, and all those things. But partial commercialization means that government started, trying to earn huge revenue from NTA. Of course, within this period too, 1992, there was mandatory network programs. So, of course, you used to have NTA News at 9, used to have, and both federal and state stations will run it. So there were mandatory programs, unlike today that you have private stations not following such mandatory programs. But then you had mandatory programs. But the major thing you should take away from this period was that broadcasting went back to concurrent list. That is, the state governments now started owning their own stations too. Broadcasting was no longer being monopolized by the federal government. Now, this was the period, third stage in the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. Now move to fourth stage. Now the fourth stage, which is the stage we're in now, is from 1992 till date. Now very interesting, because this was when broadcasting had a huge turnaround. In 1992, look at the things you should take away from this point. In 1992, a major event took place, and that was when broadcasting was deregulated. Broadcasting was deregulated in Nigeria. That is to say, private individuals came in and started owning radio and TV stations. A channel like Silverbird, these stations started coming in. Menage Broadcasting International, they came into the scene and created a revolution, made the industry very competitive, made the audience that is excited to tune into television programs, and then also helped the state stations to up their programs, up their quality, because there was competition. So in 1998, and how did that happen? Yes, there was this. That was during the Babangida President Ibrahim Babangida, the military president, his regime. There was this Decree 38. They used Decree 38. You should remember that. This is one of the numbers you should remember. Decree 38. That was what they used to deregulate the broadcast industry. It was no longer being controlled by government alone. Private stations came in, and then you could remember AIT, African Independent Television. Don't forget AIT. Don't forget Silverbird Television. Don't forget Menage International Broadcasting. Menage was, another very interesting station that came up there. So don't forget these stations. Don't try to carry all the stations around, but at least these few channels came up much later. But the fact is that industry was regulated, and then private stations gradually moved into the industry and made the media landscape very competitive. And then there was emergence of satellite and cable television, and then that's various kinds of media ownership. So that it was no longer government owning media. They will not have government ownership to have privately owned media, And even within that private ownership, you now had what we call cross-media ownership, where you own somebody who owns television station, own a radio station, and all that. You have chain ownership, where stations started owning. You see somebody that owns more than one newspaper. You see somebody that owns more than one radio station. Even today, you have what we call this Nigeria Info. Nigeria Info is the same person that owns Nigeria Info owns Wazobia FM and then owns Cool FM. So that's what we call chain ownership in broadcasting. So the industry became excited. Even till today, you see evolution. A lot is still happening. So of course today you find top quality programs. People conglomerates. You talk about big conglomerates in Nigeria like Silverbird, that is owned by Senator Bembure Bruce. They have cinema group, Silverbird Cinema. They have radio station. They have television station. They have, that's what it is even pageantry. So a conglomerate is into several businesses, and the industry has become very exciting. So you see the evolution of the broadcast media in Nigeria, the evolution of the indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria. You know, it's very exciting. The evolution is the story is very exciting. You can see that I didn't bother myself with dates. I bothered myself with the gist. Get the gist, and that is what will help you to always remember the evolution of broadcasting in Nigeria, the evolution of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria, the evolution of Nigerian press, and that's a good thing to do. Thank you very much. Now we go over to other things. Now that you have gotten the gist of the history of broadcasting in Nigeria and the history of indigenous broadcasting in Nigeria, now there are dates you should bear in mind. Take down these dates: 1932, 1932, 1933, 1932. We have 1932. I'll give you 1932. I'll give you 1933, 1933, 1933, 1935, 1935. This is it. Once you get these dates, you don't have to remember all these dates. You could remember just one. You could remember just three, and then use it to build your story while answering those questions. We have 1935. We have 1956. These are dates that will help you to build a story. 1956, 1950. Before 1956, we have 1950. 1950, 1956, 1956. Then we have 1959, 1959, 1959. Then we have 1960, 1960. Check out these dates: 1960, 1962, 1962. Check out these dates: 1976. 1976, 1977, 1977, and then of course we have 1990, and after 1990 we have 1992. There are close to 1,000 dates. There are close to 1,000 dates in the history of the press. But look at what you do. This is a trick when responding to a question on the history of the Nigerian broadcasting, especially indigenous broadcasting. But here we're giving you dates. Remember the first thing, gist. The next thing, dates. Now, if you're able to remember just 2 or 3 or 4 of these dates, that could be used to build your story. But look at how interesting. Look at how interesting these dates are. I just gave you like up to 8 to 9 dates, close to 9-10 dates. Now check these dates. Now, the first one is 1932. What happened in 1932? That was the first time. That was when the history of broadcasting in Nigeria began. That was when the Empire radio station of the colonial government was established in Lagos. Empire radio station. They call it a relay station. That is, it was just a redistribution station, just transmitting information, relaying it, made it possible for people in Nigeria to hear what BBC was airing, BBC Foreign Service. So that's the colonial government was just controlling it, and they were using it to rebroadcast. So that's, in fact, you shouldn't even forget these dates, whether it is history of broadcasting or history of the Nigerian press. 1932 is huge. That's when the story began. 32, 33. What of 1933? 1933 was when FRCN, Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, was established as a radio diffusion system. As a radio distribution system, not diffusion system. That was in 1933. 1933, radio distribution system. Radio distribution system. It was installed in Lagos. I remember what I said. 1933, Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria was first established as a radio distribution system. What was the job? Whether it is distribution or radio diffusion, whether it's distribution or diffusion, the fact is that the main job of that station was to relay information from BBC. The name was just moved to, it was now made Radio Corporation, FRCN, Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria. The reform you have today in FRCN came up years after, when indigenous broadcasting came up, and then it became an indigenous affair. But then it was a colonial government affair. 33 FRCN, of course, the system was changed from 33 to, in 1935. They now changed the radio distribution system to radio diffusion system. But 33 is not that huge. But that's what happened in 1933. But don't forget 32. 35. Now listen, don't forget 32, 1932. Empire Radio Station. That's the story began. 1932. Empire Radio Station. Then 33. FRCN was established, not the FRCN you see today, but as a radio distribution service, just to relay the information from BBC. That's 33. Then 1935, it was not now changed from distribution system, radio distribution system, to radio diffusion system. To radio diffusion system, or what you call diffusion system. But that's why I said 35 is not huge. 33, 32, huge dates. Then what of 1950? What of 1956? Next date you should remember, 1956. That was when Awolowo had that friction with the colonial official of the colonial government. 1956 was when Awolowo was denied the right of reply. 1956 was when Awolowo was denied the right of reply. So I'm giving you easy dates to remember. You can see what I said about 1935. The thing where the radio station was changed from distribution to diffusion. But I said that's not huge. Huge dates. 1932, 1933. Major things happened. These are flashpoints. They call them disruptive dates. Disruptive dates. That is when major events took place. There are several of them, but these are the ones that you can remember, and to make it easy for you to respond to questions in the history of broadcasting in Nigeria. 56 was when Awolowo was denied right of reply in the then colonial government-owned radio station at federal level. So the history of indigenous broadcasting began with the problem Awolowo had with the official of the colonial government in 1956. That was when the colonial official criticized Awolowo's government and the action group government that was leading the Western Nigeria then, and then he wanted to respond to those allegations, and then the criticism, they said no, they didn't give him that, and that was when 56. That was when he now went for the national constitutional conference, where he made the observation that broadcasting should be in the concurrent legislative list, and then it was accepted, and then the regions started having their own stations, were given permission to have their own broadcast stations, while the federal government still enjoyed the station. So you see why 1956 is a huge date. If you are writing the history of the broadcast media and you remember 1956, that's huge too. Nothing was established then, but there was an event that opened up the gate for development of broadcasting in Nigeria. Now another date you should now take after 1956 is 1959. You and I know what happened in 1959. So 1959, very interesting date. 1959. That was when the first television station in Africa was established, and that was right here in Nigeria, and that is Western Nigeria Television. Now Awolowo established Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, and Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service set up Western Nigeria Television. Awolowo was the premier of the Western region when broadcasting was in the concurrent legislative list. So the regions had the power to establish their own. So Awolowo in 1959 established the Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service, which set up Western Nigeria Television, which was the first in Nigeria and the first in Africa. Now, another interesting date, 1960. 1960. 1960. You saw it there. 1960 was when the Eastern Nigerian government then established Eastern Nigeria Television, and that was Michael Okpara was the premier of Eastern Nigeria then. Awolowo was the premier of Western Nigeria. Okpara was the premier of Eastern Nigeria, but just Eastern Nigeria government established their own television station in 1960. They took, a lead from what Western Nigeria did, and I said the regions started having their own. And in the 1962, the next date, 1962, the Northern Nigeria government, led then by Ahmadu Bello, was leading the premier of Western Nigeria, Northern Nigeria government. Then they set up their own broadcast service. They called it Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria. Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria. So very interesting date, 1962. So you see, 1959, 1960, 1962. 3 dates for the establishment of regional broadcast stations. 3 dates: 59, 60, 62. If only you can remember who established what. Not in terms of the name of the premier. Of course, Awolowo you cannot forget. But if you don't remember Okpara or you don't remember Ahmadu Bello, the fact is that the Northern Nigeria government established theirs, and their own was called Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria. Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria, which then set up radio. Which set up Radio Kaduna TV. That's what they called the television station. Radio Kaduna TV. In bracket RKTV. Broadcasting Corporation of Northern Nigeria, in bracket BCNN. Eastern Nigeria Television, in bracket ENTV. Now they moved them. Another important date we have is 1976. You and I know what happened in 1976. 1976. That was when the military government, the federal government then, led by General Olusegun Obasanjo, took over the regional broadcast stations. So broadcasting left the concurrent list and went back to only the federal hands. So if I ask you, when did broadcasting first leave the concurrent list? That was the second stage. That's 1976. When Obasanjo's government came in, they took over the regional stations, and then the federal government started running broadcasting. They started taking charge of broadcasting. And then another date I give you, 1977. That was when Nigerian Television that you see today was established. It was established as Nigerian Television, in bracket NTV, and then changed to Nigerian Television Authority in 1977. In 1977, it was changed. It was established as NTV and then NTA, because they wanted NTA to take charge of running the broadcast services. So NTA, all those regional stations were now controlled by the federal government then. And then another important date is 1990. That was when Voice of Nigeria was established. Voice of Nigeria was established. Why is it an important date? Because that was the first time the external broadcast service, they call it external radio service. External radio service was established in Nigeria. That was Voice of Nigeria. And then 1992. 1992 was when the regulation of broadcasting took place. 1992.